It's Thursday night. It's Act 3 live for the final time in this series, which is pretty extraordinary. This is number 14 of all these many weeks. It seems like the C19 thing has been going on for years and years and years, and we've been doing Zooms for all our life, or half our lives. My name's Adrian. I'm a coach, and I'm married to this person here whose name is
Judy. I am also a coach, and I specialise in working with mums and dads usually, but not exclusively. I also work with people in Act 3, which, in case you're not sure what that actually means, it's the years roughly between 50 and 80.
Yeah, wow. Those are the years which used to be called retirement, but we're not calling them that anymore.
It's a retired word. So we're on this Zoom tonight, and we're going to explore the subject of death, which I think you probably all know that because you've signed up for it. But what does it actually mean during Act 3 to confront it, to talk about it, to manage it well? There's been a lot of it around in the COVID months that we've all been living through, but whether it's something that we've been directly affected by, or parents above us, siblings, family members, close people to us. Since we started these Zooms in April, your aunt died, didn't she?
Yeah, my Aunt Josephine died. She was very old and in a home, and she became one of those people. Yeah.
And we know that pretty much all of you will have had some experience of death touching you in the last few months, whether it's an immediate person to you or someone you've heard of. But our intention tonight is to make this our final session for now, a very constructive and positive conversation. So a few people have been in touch, haven't they?
Yeah, someone who is anonymous got in touch to say, I'm going to read this. I'm a great fan of approaching death with curiosity and trust. That's in theory. And have so much more to learn about putting my grand words into practice. My particular concern, you asked us to offer ideas, is how I can most skillfully explain to my partner that I don't want to feel obliged to look after him anymore.
Do I have to look after you?
Well, we'll get into that later.
Okay.
Neither do I want him to be tied to looking after me in those years of frailty. This is an ongoing conversation that I'm having with my life coach supervisor, so I'm having help with this. Last week, our guest Thomas said, within any organization, you need to find your help somewhere else. And the anonymous says, yes, including our marriage, still intact and also evolving rapidly. So thank you, anonymous, for that. And you're quite right. As we mentioned in one of our Zooms a few weeks ago, Judy and I are big fans of getting help with a relationship or marriage. You know, we've done it, and we would be happy to do it again. We call it a marriage MOT. You service your boiler and your car. Why not service your relationship? So
absolutely,
that's a great idea.
So we also heard from Sarah, who's a writer, and she has had a lot of experience with death and with dying. And she said, I've spent much time with family and friends who've been terminally ill or dying, and I've arranged many funerals and dealt with never-ending grief. Two things she suggests, some of you may know these things already, is to, if you have access to the Macmillan nurses, who are wonderful in the way that they deal with both the dying person but also their loved ones. And secondly, she recommends that a good bereavement counsellor can be very supportive, and if nothing else, they offer a safe place to cry. Sarah writes that she's just planned her own funeral. She said it was easy and straightforward, not the least bit maudlin, and what's more, as she's a writer, she can write her own eulogy.
It's nice to be able to write your own eulogy, isn't it?
Yes, try writing your eulogy.
You can eulogize as much as you like. Whether they'll read it out, of course, at the time is another thing. So tonight, take care of yourself tonight over all this. It's sensitive stuff, and I don't need to say that, but we will say it. I've just said it. But it's not something to avoid either. That's why we're doing it. And we know it's difficult for some, and one at least person who has been a regular on these Zooms has decided not to join tonight because it's a bit sensitive for that person, and we completely get that. But thank you for all those many people who have joined. I can see there's 26 computers on this thing already. So thank you very much to all of you for joining. It's a sensitive subject, and sometimes, you know, something might get said that's painful or hard to hear. Well, just hold it, go with it for the moment, for the time being.
Yeah. No intention of hurting anyone, obviously.
Of course not,
so,
no.
yeah.
And we're encouraging you to take something positive out of this and something that energizes you to move forward with. And, you know, that may seem strange when we're talking about death, but, you know, we're all going to be there, aren't we?
Yeah, you don't get out of this alive.
So the trick is to try and get to this place without regrets. That's the whole idea.
Okay, so it's the last session, and it was the last chapter that we wrote in our book, The Art of Growing Older, and it was a really difficult chapter to write. It was very hard to know how to get it right, and also to plan for tonight. But we're ever so excited about our guest, and we'll tell you more about her soon. It's a book, if you don't know, that is a guide to this stage of life that used to be called retirement, and we've been receiving lovely messages from you and from various review sites as well. So we hope this will be an ongoing useful tool once these Zooms are finished. And the aim tonight is obviously to have a life full in Act 3 and to do all we can to live without regrets. So what are we actually going to cover?
So it's about endings. It's the end of these Zooms, of course, as we've said, and what we've taken out of these Zooms. And we'll ask you later on to put in the chat what you might have been taking away and what we might have done better. And it's about having a good death. And we're going to be talking with our lovely guest, Vicki Lant, who got in touch with us to say she could talk about this stuff. So thank you to her, and we'll hear from her shortly. And I'm very interested for you to write your comments and questions in the chat while we're going along. So let's try the chat facility now.
It's at the bottom of your screen.
If you're a Zoom virgin, you won't be a Zoom virgin, I know, no. Not by now. Type in, what song might you want played at your funeral? So what song might you want to be played at your funeral, or music? So Judy, what would you like?
Well, far too many, but I think I'll just go for Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. You too? I
still haven't found the husband that I'm looking for. Yeah.
And what are you going to have?
Well, if you're in my family, we once went on holiday driving in France, and I made a compilation of the same song with all the different cover versions I could find, about 20 of them. And it was Take Me to the River by Al Green. And so you could take me to Southwold Pier, take my ashes and drop me in the water.
Drop them in the water.
Yeah.
And if you can't think of a song, maybe What's Your Last Meal? Not as if you're on death row, but or maybe it is. So what would your last meal be?
So put it in the chat.
Let's see.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Lady in Red. Oh, Thunder Road, Bruce Springsteen. Yeah, we'll be reading them out. You can probably see them as well.
Got to multitask now.
Yes.
Where's the chat? Yeah. I've lost it.
No, Act 3, fumble. Yes. Okay.
Anyway, let's not worry about
that. Okay, so a bit of housekeeping, just to remind you, this is recorded, and please put your view top right there on speaker view, and we will be controlling, so will Tilly, who's doing the back room for us tonight, when people can speak, won't we?
We will. And yes. Tonight we're going to light a candle, as we always do for the last time. This time, in our family, we have had a tradition of lighting a candle to bring into the room people who are not with us, who either can't be with us because they're elsewhere, or people, for example, tonight, who have died that we want to remember. So we're not embarrassed about that. Sometimes people get embarrassed. Sometimes our kids have been embarrassed about us doing that. We're not embarrassed by it because it's important for us to bring that stuff into our daily life, and we do it as a matter of course. And we do it when we're working with people, with clients, and we do it with people who just visit our house. Yeah. And you can take out of that what you will, or you can just leave it alone.
So we'll kick off now. Thanks for all these music ideas coming in, by the way, with, as we always do, a bit of our own content on why death made it into the book. What are the salient points? There are so many things we could say. So we've picked up what we hope is the useful bits for any of you on the Zoom tonight. Where should we start?
Well, let's start, Tilly, with the tree. And just if you haven't seen the basic metaphor for the book, this is your life laid before you in the form of a tree. And the visible bits above the ground are, you know, your health, your home, your money, your work, your play, your friends, your world, anything else you might get up to, which you might put into the special branch. But it's all sustained by the roots, which is your attitude, your purpose, your values, and your key relationships. That's our thesis on the book. If you get the book, that's what you get expounded. And that's what we've been working through over these last weeks. And tonight, you know, it's pretty important to think about the roots, isn't it, Jude?
Absolutely. And in some ways, we would argue that attitude to death and dying and all it encompasses is probably the most significant thing you can focus on. Roger, who we interviewed in this chapter, he had a very interesting thing to say on this. He was given the most hideous diagnosis of cancer.
243.
And he said, at my first consultation, I was asked what I could do given the horrible diagnosis. We asked one of the nurses who'd been doing this a long time, what was the single thing that makes a difference to getting through this? Oh, attitude, definitely, the nurse said. If you have a positive attitude, that means so much. I think that's really important. There were 1 or 2 people having the chemo who were bitter, and I felt rather sorry for them, but I also thought, you've got this so wrong. They were rude to the nursing staff, they were bitter to each other, and the attitude, well, they didn't survive. They were the ones to go first. So I think, yeah, if you picture those 4 roots, really think about your attitude. But the other thing is that before we even get to those, some people are just very much in the denial camp that death is even going to hit them or affect them.
I met someone like that. In fact, it was my mother-in-law.
Yeah, so a very close family friend died, and we were the ones to tell her. And we said, Mum, this person's died. And Mum's answer was, oh, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's actually a fantastic strategy. If you just say it didn't happen, then it kind of solves a bunch of stuff, doesn't it? Really,
Yeah,
so it's
quite
it it has a sort of limited value strategy, but it works in the short term.
And one of the things that's also true is the astonishing fact that 54% of adults in this country have still not written a will.
That's unbelievable.
Which is astonishing. So we're going to ask you.
We're going to find out. Yes, we're going to fire up a poll. So Tilly, have you written a will? Is the poll there, Tilly? Let's see whether we can see that.
Poll is there.
Here we go.
Here it comes. Is it coming?
Okay,
Judy?
yes or no?
Tilly?
Yep, they are voting.
Oh, they're voting. It's just
Oh,
we can't vote.
we can't see it.
No,
Okay,
no.
right.
We're looking at all your lovely faces.
It's happening in
Or
another
scribbling.
sphere.
Yes, yeah. So do we get the results?
I'm willing to bet that
Over half.
way more than
Have written,
half
yeah.
of this intelligent and attractive cohort have written a will. Let's find out.
That's my hunch. Yeah. I don't think we can see the results. I think Tilly's looking at them.
Tilly, have you
What have you got to say, Till?
has everyone voted?
So almost everyone voted, and it's 83% yes.
Oh, I knew it.
17% no.
Yes. And the national average is what, 54?
Yeah, 54%.
54%
have not.
have not.
Over half have not. So we're doing better than that.
So you're above
That's
average.
really
So award yourself a Cadbury's Dairy Milk. Yes, well done.
But also, you might have written a will, but how long ago did you do it? And does it need updating?
You know, we did that, didn't we? Because we had a family of 2 lovely daughters. We'd written a will. We thought, oh, that was job done. And it wasn't until 20 years later that we realized that our 3rd daughter had arrived and she didn't figure in the will at all.
It was, and there were so many other things.
Oh dear.
So,
but we put it right eventually.
Yeah. So thank you for voting. And obviously, we should have said that was anonymous. So we're not going to come hounding after you because we can tell.
We're not selling you a will. No.
Yeah. But essentially, there's some messes that need clearing up, aren't there?
Certainly are. Yeah. There's the psychological messes, which things to do with having made peace with people you need to make peace with, reconciling relationships,
and it's about regrets, isn't it? It's about not having regrets before you die. And we were very struck by the book by Bronnie Ware on the regrets of the dying, and the 5 regrets. Which
Tilly, can we see that
Tilly,
slide?
we've got a slide. Which, and this woman was with people dying every day of her working life. Some of you may know these, but she said these things here. I wish I had the courage to live a life to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. That was the 2nd most common one. And all men she nursed and cared for said that. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings, and I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends, and I wish I'd let myself be happier. So we're wondering how that's landing for you, reading those top 5 regrets of the dying there.
We found that really kind of was an important stimulus really for the writing of our book, that in the end, who would want to have regrets at the end? So if you don't want that, so what are you going to do? So that was really one of the things that kicked this book off,
absolutely.
wasn't it? Yeah.
So those messes we're talking about, I mean, there's a lot of detail that we can't go into tonight, but essentially we're going to split them into sort of the internal, the psychological messes that need sorting out, ideally, and then there's the practical stuff. So psychologically,
well, yeah, damaged relationships. Did I do all right? For example, is a question as a dad, for example, or as a mum, or as just a person. When I get to the end, I kind of think, did I do all right as a person, a human being? Is a fair question, which I think a lot of people probably ask themselves privately, if not publicly, when they get to the end.
yes,
and that's a fair question.
And damaged relationships is a really enormous topic. I wish we could have longer on that tonight, but many people lie on their deathbeds just tortured by how they have not made peace with difficult relationships.
Yeah, an uncle of mine who I thought was a pretty peaceful guy towards the very, very end of his life, when I was with him in the last months, I was surprised by how much anger he expressed about his father.
He was a very placid
guy. And he was
a
placid guy. Yeah. And so I just thought, wow, this is interesting. It's emerging. And he was in his mid-80s, if not late 80s. And that was interesting, you know.
So there's also the F word. And I wonder what you're all thinking, but what we're thinking when we say the F word for tonight is the idea of forgiveness. And you might remember our prof, the doctor, Richard Vincent, who's on the call tonight. Thank you for joining us, Richard. But in the health chapter he wrote for us, he said that forgiveness is one of the most healing phenomena. And it really can set you free from all of that bitterness or resentment that's been following you around, perhaps for decades. And is it time to relook at that and to try and to reach a point of forgiving somebody or a situation, and to be able to feel that sense of freedom?
And these are not small things to think about. And it may well be that you want to get help with tackling those, conversations or those thoughts or those feelings that you've got. And being coaches, we're not counselors or therapists, but we're at the kind of thin end of the wedge of that world of talking help, as you were. It might well be worth getting some help with having some conversations if you want to do that.
Definitely.
And then there's the practical stuff.
Yes, and I'm imagining, because over 80% of you have got your wills written out, that you'll know about will writing, you'll know about your lasting power of attorney, the medical route and the financial route. So who's going to be making those decisions if you can't make them? And a very dear friend of ours who has sometimes been on these calls, her mother had a terrible stroke a few weeks ago, and all of a sudden it's thrown up all kinds of chaos about her end of life wishes and how her affairs are managed, which nobody could see coming at the time. But house clutter, are you leaving a terrible mess for your loved ones to try and fight their way through endless cardboard boxes? And when we cleared out my mum's house, our mum's house, she would just collect piles of things on the kitchen table, under the kitchen table, and every now and again put them in a cardboard box and carry them upstairs to a bedroom. And you never knew what was going to be in there. It could be £50, it could be a pizza leaflet, anything. So we had to go through absolutely everything.
And a neighbour of ours, just a few doors away, when her mum left the house, she and her sister had to trawl through the whole house looking for some valuables. Yeah. And the house was like Steptoe's yard.
Yeah, there was rats' nests.
It was just unbelievable. Horrendous. And they had to go through every single envelope in the whole house to find some jewels, actually, that were lost in there. And they did find them. They did find them eventually. But my goodness, it must have taken them weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah. So, and funeral arrangements, we've buried all four of our parents, and it was easier when we had some clue from conversations while they were still alive, or things we found that they'd written down about anything to do with music or flowers or
what was
whatever.
It that you were with your dad's funeral that you said?
He just once made an off-the-cuff remark, said, I want red tulips when I die. So that was just like, oh, right, okay, one less thing to think about.
And we knew he liked a particular piece of piano music. And we knew he was very fond of vanilla ice cream.
Yeah, so we had that as well.
We had vanilla ice cream, Beethoven and red tulips.
There will be other things in your situations as well that become important from a practical point of view. And maybe it's about trying to find somebody to buddy up with, who you can do some reciprocal help, listening to each other about what you do need to do and what decisions you need to make.
You don't have to face it on your own, do you?
No, there's death doulas we heard tonight. So doulas are people who help people give birth, and there are death doulas to help you plan the way in which you're going to end your life, or what you need to do about that, certainly. And you will know us well enough that we bang on and on and on about how valuable planning is while you still can and while you've got the choice. There's Nina's story we mentioned last week about how her and her grown-up siblings and their elderly mum had the most astonishing planning conversations that were really difficult and painful and tearful at times, but my goodness, were they glad that they actually
Yes, everyone we've spoken to has had those kind of deep conversations with family about what do we want to be happening at this end of our lives, or whoever it is in the conversation. They're really pleased they had it.
And how do you start it?
Yeah, it's the starting is the thought. Well, perhaps we'll get into that with Vicki. So starting the conversation can be very, very tricky, and people may not be willing to join you in the conversation. And we'd often say to people, if you don't know what to say, it's okay to say, I don't know what to say. It's better to say that than to keep your mouth shut.
Or avoid.
Or if someone's been bereaved, don't avoid them or just cut them off. It's better to say, I don't know what to say. That's a good place to start to say something, is to say that, to acknowledge what is, which is, I'm a bit of a loss, or I don't know quite where to go with this conversation. But that's a great place to be. And if you're just able to say it out loud, and if necessary, rehearse it in private before you meet the person who has been bereaved, or or the person you want to have a chat with.
Well, I think there are so many ways we can communicate in the 21st century. It might not be that you bump into the person or go and see them, but you can text them, you can write them a note, and send them an email. At least that from you to them is that intention of, I am thinking about you. This must be really hard.
And actually, I think, well, I'd be very interested to hear what other people say, but it's very difficult to get it wrong. It's important to be in touch. I think, I'd be interested in what Vicki says about that.
Yeah, that's true. So, and also we would say, if you can, find a really good person to take the funeral.
The world of funerals has been completely rock and rolled in our lifetime. I'm 65. It used to be very dull and ordinary, I think, probably. And nowadays you can get, when we wrote all over your parents' coffins and
Sharpie pens,
did funny things with them. And there's a gazillion things you can now do with regard to funerals, which make them far more interesting than they used to be.
So one of the people we chatted to in the book is a celebrant, and he's done over 400 funerals. And he says, no two deaths are alike. People care, they don't care. There's love, there's no love. There's flowers, there's no flowers. In the end, there's great equality in death. You deserve the best that I can give you, he said. And when planning a funeral, I asked, what would the deceased have liked? Emotional intelligence is needed. It's about what's authentic and real, telling the truth in a way that's honest but palatable. And we'll shortly hear more from Vicki about that as well.
Well, now it's time to bring Vicki in. So Vicki, unmute yourself. It's time to hear from Vicki, who's our special guest. Her husband, John, a much-loved husband and father who embraced life to the full, including sailing alone around Scotland, at 67, began showing unusual signs of behavior. For example, getting lost in familiar places and forgetting how to dress himself. John was a leading light in the osteopathic world, and a father of 5 grown-up children finally agreed to Vicki's request to see a doctor. Within days, the medics discovered his brilliant brain was also home to a grade 4 tumor the size of an orange.
So Vicki, whose working life included senior roles in National Sure Start implementation, Barnardo's and Cambridgeshire County Council, set about amidst the crushing inevitability of losing John while supporting the children, making sure that the time they had left would be the best they could possibly hope for. And since John died, Vicki has moved cities and returned to something she always loved, but hadn't done for over 30 years, and there'll be more of that later. But we think, having chatted to Vicki, her experience around death is one that we could all do with hearing, as any of us could find ourselves in Vicki's position or indeed in John's position.
So welcome, Vicki.
Thank you very much indeed. I really do appreciate the opportunity to share these experiences with you. I think probably just to say that our experience as a family was incredibly concentrated into a period of about 12 months. But as I've been thinking about what I wanted to share with you tonight, I think there's a lot of just general themes that come out of it, which are incredibly apposite if you find yourself in a situation with a close person who is facing death, if you are given a diagnosis and find yourself that way too, or that you have somebody that you're not quite so close to but want to be supportive, because part of what we experienced was, as Judy and Adrian said, people just not having the language. And I think that was probably the thing that made me jump in and say, I've been here, I know this, last week when they were talking about the fact that they wanted to run this as their kind of key part of the session.
So you said we had a very useful chat with you earlier this week, Vicki, and what struck us enormously was that you said we should all be practicing talking about death and dying. So how do we do that?
Well, death is part of life. I mean, it's a milestone that we all experience, but we don't get to share. And we celebrate milestones in all sorts of different ways, but we don't often think about planning this one with the same joy as we do others. And so just kind of starting to even think about, as you did, and you introduced, what music would you have? And one of the kind of flippant responses that I had with my kids way back before any of this happened was Rolling Stones' Hey You Get Off of My Cloud, which seemed like a good thing.
Good job.
A bit further on down the line, I'm a shameless diva, and so The Arrival of the Queen of Sheba has to be on there somewhere. And I've now got a version of it by Doulas, who are the most wonderful Irish band, and it's The Arrival of the Queen of Sheba in Galway, so Spotify if you haven't found it. But I think that the critical thing is just recognizing the importance of saying died and death. People go into excruciating agonies to avoid saying those words to you, or for you to say to them. There are so many euphemisms, and it is cringeworthy. And particularly when you're actually trying to deal with situations that you need to, when somebody is dying or just after they have, and there's a plethora of stuff to get organized, and people trot out these shocking phrases, condolence card phrases that meet you every time you open a conversation. And it's hard. You almost have to tell people, please just empathize with me, but the way you can help me most is do your job efficiently, so that I don't have to keep coming back and telling you my story. Put notes on my record. Don't make me have to tell you this all over again. Today I'm feeling good. Tomorrow I might be sobbing my socks off, and we won't get anywhere. So it's recognizing that you probably have to give permission to the people that are around you to be direct. I find that helps me. You may have a different kind of take on it, but that was, let people know how you want it to be spoken about, and that helps hugely.
Gosh.
Were you able to do, if you're in grief, it's quite difficult to give people permission to do anything, in a way, isn't it?
It kind of is, and I know there were times when I was not good at it. When you were, it's bad enough when you're trying to do internet banking, but when you're trying to do internet banking with somebody that you're just kind of either taking over power of attorney or they've just died, and a junior person in the food chain is asking you for this piece of information or that piece of information, and you've told them right at the outset, I can't do this right now but you can ask me other things that are on our account so that I'll be able to tell you those. But they can't, because it's off script. And actually beginning to get your way up the food chain so that you can actually have a conversation with somebody who can empathize and take you off script is hard.
Yeah.
And I have to say that was probably one of the hardest things
Gosh, yeah.
I ever had to deal with. And there were times when I regret, and I'm very sorry to say, I did shout and I did get angry, and my daughter came and took the phone off me and said, I'll take it from him. And that's where kind of the power of actually having people around you who can do stuff, or doing stuff when there are other people around, is helpful and sensible. The other thing that is also quite challenging in our world is that people are very sensitive and a little embarrassed about their spiritual life, if they have one. And obviously this is a time when you may want to think that there is something bigger around than just your mechanical body, that you have a spirit, that you have a soul, you have something that goes on beyond you. And starting to have those conversations, or being faced with those conversations when you actually haven't started thinking about it already, and knowing how you feel or where you feel, is another messy bit. Because if people try and share that with you, they're worried that they're perceived as being evangelizing or trying to persuade you about something that you don't want to be persuaded about. Or if you want to talk about it and that's not their thing either, then they feel embarrassed. So again, those sorts of explorations are actually quite helpful, I think. Again,
is there a phrase or a kind of thought that you found particularly helpful in the context of that situation?
Golly. No, I suppose it was about being not afraid to say, I want to be alone sometimes, so that you can have those quiet thoughts. I'm sure there will be material in your book that you talk about mindfulness, because again, being in the moment, being reflective, journaling, all of those things take you into a place that is other than now, other than you. And there are people that you can start to reach out to and discover if there is spiritual stuff, and there's the internet, for heaven's sake. You know, there are things that you can begin to find that just take you on a personal journey. And again, there's no better time than now, you know, to begin to address stuff you haven't.
Yeah, so don't be afraid to kind of be you.
Exactly. Yes.
Tell us about what the experience did for you as a family, Vicki.
Because you had 2 children with John, and then he had 3 grown-up ones as well, didn't he?
Absolutely. I think probably for all of us, it encouraged us to talk and really express ourselves honestly. With step families, although I think we're very close, and generally we are, there's always stuff that you dance around the handbags about, and you know, this was a time for not doing any of that. You know, you have to be incredibly honest about how you're feeling, because as carers, you need to be strong, you need to be on it, because the nature of a brain tumor is bizarre, with all the kind of chemicals and medication that they're given. I mean, John was putting on massive amounts of weight. He became very challenging in aspects of his behavior, and certain things that were probably at the polar extremes of normal John became even more extreme and hard to negotiate. So that kind of combination of mental change and physical change meant that there were challenges for the family in both physical management, you know, basic stuff like taking him to the loo in the middle of the night, managing, as you introduced him as somebody who would sail single-handed, and he was doing that sort of right up until probably about 6 months before he started feeling a bit strange, and we started noticing other things that were very un-John-like. But he could not bear to be minded, and he still had this sense of personal invincibility, which meant that trying to give him freedom to be himself, but knowing that in a social care context, we were responsible for him. We were the responsible adults. And so therefore we had to find a way that he could have his independence as well as minding him. And he found that incredibly hard. So sharing that amongst us as a family, in order that we all took that responsibility, and that all the children understood that the stepkids who were able to come in and give us time out knew what they were taking on if they took him out by themselves. He had, or we put the Find My Friend feature on his phone, which he wasn't aware of, but we knew how we could track him on our iPhones if he went walkabout.
Good idea.
We had a sort of a bit like Paddington Bear. There were little kind of cards in his pockets to say, if you find John, he may not know where he is, so please give us a call. So there were our 3 mobiles on there. We wanted him to have money to take out, but we knew that that was a risky thing, so we never gave him much. But the wallet that he had was on an elastic that was on the side of the button on the inside of his jacket, so it wouldn't fall off, even if it fell out of his pocket. It's all the kinds of things that you might do with a toddler, but it just meant that he could be independent, and everybody needed to know how that worked, and obviously how to deal with stuff if the worst things happened.
Gosh.
The other thing, sorry.
No, go on. Go on.
The other things that were important, though, were to also just do crazy stuff. We had a period between the surgery that he had, kind of a fortnight or so after the diagnosis, and before chemo could start. I mean, this enormous kind of pirate scar from front to back had to have enough time to heal. But it was terrifying, so he had to have a hat or something, so that it wasn't so much about him, but it was about, making sure that other people just didn't faint as they came into contact with him. But we decided that we would use that month to do some really crazy things that he wanted to do, we wanted to do as a family. So we did the Orient Express, and we took him to Venice, because Venice was kind of the love of our lives. We've been there so many great times, and it was a real last thing that he just wanted to see and be there and do. The travel was fabulous. The people on the train were stunning. They were so compassionate and so blasé about this guy with this whopping scar on his hat, and everything about the kind of slightly disorientated person that was with them, but they treated him like royalty, and it was fabulous. So yes, doing crazy is good. And I suppose the other important thing for all of us was it really taught us about living the mindful life. Every minute counts, and that's the thing that I think we take away now, post John. It mattered then, but it makes us realise, there was the 29th of January when we thought he just kind of got some neurological thing, and the 30th of January when we knew that it wasn't just some neurological thing, and our world completely changed. And that can happen. So, living today as it really matters, and you're not getting it back. So, the to-do list that just rolls on, and I'm guilty here. I've got a pile of junk all over my study floor that just doesn't attract or interest me at all at the moment, but it is something I have to do. That's really important to just do it. Just do it. And the other thing was, you know, just launching into the really hard stuff. And I suppose the hardest thing we had to decide was him not taking chemo medication. He had the chemo treatment, and then they prescribed chemo medication, which just knocked him out, and he was sleeping. Rip Van Winkle, you know, it's not the guy. And it just meant that his life would just disappear in sleeping. There was no quality. And he wanted some quality. So we'd been and had the review at the hospital. We took ourselves onto King's Parade in the sunshine, got some fizz and some nibbles, and we sat there and decided, yep, it stops here. And we take the consequences of what that means. And we just plan now to do stuff, because he would be able to do stuff, but possibly for not as long. But we fitted in lots of stuff, including he gave his daughter away in a wedding in October, many other things. But in terms of you know, affecting us, that was probably the biggie decision that actually shifted gear and then made us start to plan the things that we really wanted to do.
Gosh, it's astonishing. So when it came to those around you who were helping or offering help, what kind of things really did help? Because we talked earlier about how people can be embarrassed and not know what to say or how to be in touch. So can you just help all of us on the call tonight with, you know, if any of us are in the situation you're in, or it's going to come and get us at some point, what really did help from other people?
Well, I guess one of the big things was actually from John himself. When we had the diagnosis and before the operation, you can imagine he was pretty terrified to actually go to sleep. He thought he might never wake up. So we spent a number of those nights, for large quantities of the night, writing stuff. So this was stuff that was important to him, stuff that he wanted to do, people he wanted to contact, people he wanted me to contact, partly to support his spiritual life, partly thinking about the funeral arrangements, partly thinking about mechanical stuff, about finances and you know, all the admin-y things that you need to do. And recognizing what his wishes were then started to shape what we wanted to try and achieve, and therefore who we needed to approach. Probably, well, I feel blessed in that Sophie and Simon, our two children, were at points, well, Sophie was, where she'd made a shift out of one aspect of her career development and was kind of looking at what next. And she immediately said she would come and help me. Simon was in the last year of his first degree and astonishingly just walked away from that and came to help, because I think we recognized that we needed to do this as a trio. For some of the reasons I've explained about the medication and the weight, we worked as a kind of magic triangle. One person was always with him and sleeping or doing the overnight, another person was on call, and the other one got some sleep. And that was the kind of triangle that we managed the whole period until pretty well the month before he died, when we did get some external support. But beyond that, then our stepchildren would give us time out. They recognized and understood, you know, the particular needs of their dad, which meant that they were willing and able to take him out, which sometimes was with their partners or their families, sometimes alone. But it just meant that the three of us could actually get out and just be silly and irresponsible for two or 3 hours. And that was just fabulous because, you know, in this sort of situation, you're on call all the time, and you are profoundly responsible. I mean, it's big time stuff. So that really tight network was a really important one. And then you really find out who your true friends are, the people who say, you can call me anytime, day or night. And you know the ones you can do that to. And they don't go, oh, I've just done this or I've just done that. Can I call you back later? No, I need you now. That's why I'm ringing you. So those kinds of things are really important. Other people very kindly just said, do you feel like us coming round and bringing food or doing something, or just sitting watching a film with you, or just doing the stuff that friends do with each other. And as you say, it's not that thing of just feeling embarrassed and knowing what not to say, or what not to say, or what to say. And sometimes just doing a thing actually gets conversation going. So if there's a job to be done, and it could be, you know, a bit of clearing, you know, a lovely friend of mine came round and helped me clear my study. This is a recurring theme. Because again, there was lots more stuff that, oh my gosh, the paper that appears when you've got kind of illness of significance to deal with. So, you know, there was stuff I needed to keep on top of. So, you know, she helped me do that. But it's that sort of thing. I also, through John, who wanted a spiritual link, he had treated a cleric in Cambridge as one of his patients, and he felt a particular affinity to this man. And I didn't know him at all, but my goodness, the warmth that came through when we met and his unfailing kindness to both of us meant that, you know, he not only spent time with John, but I felt I could go and let off steam in a safe way. And he was wonderful because he turned the conversation back on what John needed from me. So, you know, he allowed me to go, and then he kind of turned it back on myself so that I could walk away knowing that there was stuff that I could do positively that would be calm and appropriate for John and actually met his needs. So that was really important. And I guess, you know, just recognizing that things like takeaways, you know, you are just so tired sometimes. Don't beat yourself up, and don't beat yourself up for not wanting to talk to people. Oh, I know something really useful we did. We said to people, please don't phone us. Please email or text us, because we're finding sleep hard right now. And so if we get to sleep, it's like manna from heaven. So text us and we'll call you when we've surfaced. That's a really good practical one.
Really practical thing.
And people didn't mind. They really didn't mind.
So I think there's some lovely things coming in on the chat, Vicki, as well. And you know, if anybody else has been in a similar situation, perhaps put in the chat as well what made a difference in your experience too. Because it's part of making this easier to talk about is things like this, where we can share what works, what doesn't. I remember when Dad died, Vera, who's on the call tonight, I woke up in the morning and opened the front door, and she just left a candle burning in a jar on the doorstep all night.
That's lovely. Which
was just a fabulous, tiny, wonderful gesture of, I'm thinking of you.
Yes.
And it was just as the children were coming out the front door with me to go walk down to school. And, you know, it's just this tiny act of kindness, and I've never forgotten it. So it doesn't have to be big, flash or clever.
Yeah.
After John's death, Vicki, what what was it that's helped you? What's that story? And
Yes.
we're going to be running out of time.
Okay.
But
Your life.
your life after death.
Okay. One of the things I guess that I didn't talk about, but actually was able to, I was working with Bernardos at the time. They were stunningly understanding and gave me huge freedoms to do my work when I could and not comment about the time that I did it. I had another year of my contract to run once John had died. And so while he was alive and after his death, the while he was alive, being able to continue to be connected to people in the real world was such an important thing to bring back into the house.
Yeah.
It was kind of normal. It was
Yeah.
stuff that was just going on and happening, and we could have political conversations, we could have, you know, all sorts of different sorts of stuff because of other stuff that we were bringing back in. So that gave me a lifeline into my professional world that I knew was still there and still wanted me, still valued me, and all of that was really important. I guess the big next falling off a cliff thing was when that contract ended. I was technically well past my sell-by date, and I ought to be thinking about that rude word retiring, which I didn't feel ready to do at all, but knew I wasn't going to be in paid work. So, you know, what was I anymore? And I certainly didn't want to be poor Mrs. John, poor Mrs. John's widow. And that was a challenge in Cambridge because he was so well known and people didn't know me so much for the stuff that I was doing away from Cambridge. So it did make me think about, okay, what's me? Where's me? Where have I gone? And one of the things I remembered from working with head teachers when the world was in cataclysmic change in school life after the Education Reform Act in 1988, was we invited a guy called Professor Guy Claxton, who I think could even have been in Cambridge at that time, to talk about managing change and managing different contexts. And his opening question to a hall of Cambridgeshire assorted, well, the whole gathered heads of the county council was, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And the challenge was, you start with something you know and trust and you extrapolate. So, you know, pick up something you're good at, pick up something you know works, and work it out from there. And I thought about that in my context, and I had been involved with contemporary dance up until literally 6 months expecting Sophie. And I took my last class probably around about then. I was 35. And so here I was at kind of 66-ish, 67, thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do now? And I thought, you know what? Let's see if there are classes about. And if any of you know the lovely Wayne Sleep, who used to be with Royal Ballet and is just you know, wonderful, Ariel incarnate. He used to do, well, he still does, he's amazing, classes for community groups. And that year, he did one on my birthday. I thought, now there's a sign. So I signed up and went to this class. I was horribly overweight and I thought, oh God, I've got to put a leotard on. This is awful, dreadful. But I did it, and I still had the moves, and I still felt, you know what? If I could shed the pounds, if I could do this, I could do that, I could carry on. And so, cut a long story short, I've been involved with the school that I first trained at 50 years ago. I've been doing classes regularly with them, and so much so that I thought, do you know what? I'm commuting up to London all the time. Why don't I move there? So 2 years ago, that's what I did. I'm living in Clam, darling. So the lovely Clapham, on the Northern Line to all my favourite places like the National Theatre and up to the Angel Islington to Sadler's Wells, and up to the Place, which I go to regularly. And all these wonderful people are now doing the most fabulous classes online, which has turned out to be something amazing, because I could never have gone to the variety of classes that I'm doing now with the volume of what I'm doing now. It's like being a student again.
Isn't it amazing?
So, you know, I'm a very happy bunny. There is most definitely fantastic. A happy life after.
That's just brilliant. Thank you, Vicki. I think the title of tonight was How to Have a Good Death, and I really think we've learnt a lot from you to answer that question, both in terms of how you managed what happened to you as a family, to John, but also what you've done since to go back and find yourself again as a dancer. And I think Stephen Rowe is probably on the call tonight, and he too is in the company of elders. So perhaps you should get together if you don't know each other.
He's someone else who came back to dance in his Act 3 years. And I'm sure there's many people.
Fabulous.
And it is great just to hear, be inspired by your story, to know that there are so many things, whether it's dance or not, or it's something else, that we can come back to at this time of our lives. And that thought of, you know, what do you do when you don't know what to do, is go back to what originally fired you up, where your energy was, inspiration, you know, creativity. Because again, that relates back to, in my head, attitude, you know, the roots of this whole thing of, you know, and purpose, sense of purpose, values. You know, it's basic stuff, isn't it? And you give yourself permission to go back there, and that's what I think you did. And that's amazing.
It's lovely to see the light in your face and the smiles and the giggles, when I'm sure there's been bucket loads of tears and anxiety as well. But you know, your story has been a great inspiration to us, and I can see lots of thank yous coming in on the chat as well to you, Vicki. I'm conscious of the time. Everybody does hours of Zoom all day, every day. So we just wanted to say, you know, as we always do, what's the one thing that you've heard tonight that you might go and do differently? Are you going to write a will?
You can put that in the chat, everybody.
It in the chat, yes.
What's the one thing you might take away? Stick it in the chat if you can. Just moving on from this conversation to a slightly wider thing, post-COVID, you know, one day this will be over. The COVID thing will relax a bit. Judy and I will be out doing stuff on the road in live, as we used to do. And
Act 3 live.
Workshops for The Guardian. We've been asked recently by The Guardian newspaper to do some more of those, which would be good. And so if you want to get in touch with us about stuff we might do, maybe with you, that'd be great.
And we also want to thank you again, Vicki, for tonight, but also all of our guests who've been on these Act 3 Zooms. Some of you are
We've
with
had
us
13
tonight.
guests over this.
All with great stuff
weeks.
that has meant that many of you have learnt from, you know, we sometimes see ourselves as like a conduit, that we have enabled these people to come forward, which we think are way more interesting and exciting and relevant, and broaden the whole Act 3 idea, really.
And we want to say thanks to our 3 lovely daughters who've really been so supportive. In the middle of COVID, in our house here, they're gone now, but when this all this started, all 3 of them were here behind the camera helping out, and they're still massively supportive. So we're very grateful to them, Phoebe, Tilly and Rosie. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And then obviously, if you haven't got the book, we would say buy the book. And
Tilly, can we see that slide?
We're also keen that we will leave the chat running a bit for the rest of the next half an hour or so, because we would love to know as well if many of you have been with us almost throughout every Zoom we've done, and if there's 1 or 2 things that you feel you've taken out of watching this series of Zooms, please share it. What have you changed? What are you thinking of changing? Because it's all about action. It's not just about a nice chat. It's absolutely about committing to action. Yeah,
it's lovely to hear those stories. And also let us know either in the chat box now or by sending us an email at adrian@act3life.com there, what is working for you, or what you would have wanted different in all these sessions, we're very happy to see what we could do better. And if you want to buy a copy of the book, you can either go to Amazon or Waterstones or Foyles and buy it online, or if you want to email me, as it says on the screen, we're offering you £10 for the book, which is actually cheaper than it is on Amazon.
Horrible.
If you're in the UK, I'll mail it to you for free, so it's £10 all in. If you're far away in another country, I'll just need to check out what the postage is. So, but I'll email you about that.
That's all fine. Yeah. So we've got someone saying their will is way out of date. Don't waste a day. Decluttering going to be committed to. Tons of thank you, Vicki. Thank you for sharing. Oh, last song from Simon, Chasing Cars, Snow Patrol, but it must be the live version from the Royal Albert Hall. Right, okay. Yes, from Steph in New Zealand, she keeps notes of dates of death and send cards to people on the anniversary. So I've heard that before, is remembering, it's not just the flurry around the funeral, it's actually going around with a bunch of flowers and the meal 2 or 3 months later when the busyness has died down, and keeping in touch. So lots of lovely things. So please keep them coming in on the chat as you run off and grab your cups of tea and glasses of wine. And we will, I'm sure, meet again some sunny day. And in the meantime, we want you to have a fantastic summer as best you can under the circumstances. We are around, so do keep in touch with us. And we hope very much that these have been useful to you. And as we said, we'd love to hear how that has happened. So goodbye from me and
goodbye from him.